Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I have a bit of MMA news, and I'll be giving my thoughts on it, my opinions, and I'll be discussing it a little bit. So without further ado, let's just get straight to the MMA news. So Chuck Liddell is coming out of retirement, and he wants to fight Jon Jones. And I know this fight won't be like the immediate fight to happen. I know definitely the UFC won't really be willing to allow Chuck Liddell to come into UFC and fight Jon Jones like that. But Bellator would be more than happy to allow Chuck Liddell to fight in their organization. So the Jon Jones fight is kind of a stretch, especially with Jon Jones having legal issues and having all these other people he has to fight in the UFC. So I think if Chuck Liddell could pile together some wins, then maybe the UFC would be open to allowing him to come back to the UFC and having that fight. Or maybe if Jon Jones somehow just does too much stuff, like keeps on the same track and ends up outside the UFC, then maybe they could fight in Bellator. But right now, I think it's best that the way it is, and also with the organization that Bellator is, even though it's a legit organization, it's a legit number 2 MMA, like pretty much competition in the world. But they do have like an opening for pretty much these, you can say freak fights, you can say super fights, you can say specialty fights, you can say these novelty fights. Because even though they have just about every division, they have respectable competition, and also they have a lot of old fighters as well who still are pretty much relatively competitive. They might not be as competitive or in their prime as they used to be, but they're at least competitive enough to challenge the younger fighters enough and potentially win some of these fights. So Bellator is certainly an organization that still is an avenue, like it's an open avenue for somebody like Chuck Liddell, who's, I would say, 50, I guess, or close to it. They already had the Royce Gracie versus Ken Shamrock fight, and both of those fighters are from the beginning of the UFC, the '93 before Dana White was even there, like long before Dana White was there, at the beginning. So if those two, that matchup could happen, then anything pretty much could happen in Bellator. And they had Dada 5000 versus Kimbo, so it certainly is a place for novelty fights. Like, they have a real competition, but also they have that side for novelty fights. So it certainly could happen. You got, like I said, you got Rampage, who is like definitely not as old as Chuck Liddell, but he's kind of like not as motivated at least. So that could be a matchup you could potentially make. Wanley, a matchup you could potentially make. You got these fighters that pretty much came from the same time, around the same time as Chuck Liddell, and people he's fought before. So they're probably around the same. I don't know. At least you can see these fights as like interesting, stylistically wise, and just like the timing. It's fair enough. It's not like throwing Chuck Liddell to some young lions, some young talent who could potentially just knock him out and have nothing to gain from it for Chuck Liddell. But you can have these fights where you got rematches, legacies, and stuff like that. So with Rampage, who beat him twice, Rampage still has the power, and Chuck Liddell still potentially has a glass chin. I think Chuck Liddell will be more motivated, so he has a good chance of beating Rampage still. You have Wanley. He already beat Wanley. Wanley's chin not the best either. They both would slug it out, and Chuck Liddell has a good shot at winning that fight. Would probably be favored to win that fight. You got Chael Sonnen, who's not as much of a legend or really wasn't that dominant in the era when Chuck Liddell was around, but since after that went on to have some pretty much build his name up more. And stylistically wise, Chael Sonnen doesn't really have power. He likes to wrestle, and Chuck Liddell has pretty good wrestling defense, whether it's getting back to his feet or defending takedowns. So even though Chael Sonnen is still more competitive at this point in his career, I think it would be a good style matchup for Chuck Liddell, and he could potentially be favored. And you got Tito, who Chuck Liddell already beat twice in dominant fashion. So these fights can still happen. Then you want some of these other fights and stuff. It's several fights that could work. You can even bring Dan Henderson out of retirement. I think Dan Henderson would be interested in Chuck Liddell fight, a fight that people wanted to happen, but that never happened. And they're both old, so it'd be like bringing Dan Henderson out of retirement to fight a 28-year-old, 25-year-old, or even an early 30-year-old who's like in the prime. He would fight someone else that's pretty much, you could say, out of their prime. And depending on, just by having that fight would motivate both of them, they would get in the best shape they could get in. So it's probably at least 10 different fights you could make up for Chuck Liddell and Bellator that wouldn't be that bizarre or crazy, because he'd be fighting people relatively around his age, relatively past their prime like Chuck Liddell, and you can make that matchup. As far as the Jon Jones fight, just hypothetically, even though it's crazy, it's still a fight that could draw some numbers. And certainly stylistically wise, Jon Jones is not a power puncher either, so maybe Chuck Liddell might be able to take some of his punches. Maybe Chuck Liddell might be able to defend some of his takedowns. So it's just one of those little fights just to happen. And also as far as Chuck Liddell's health and legacy, Chuck Liddell spent 8 years out of the game, so maybe he had some time for his health to heal. Maybe he's been training and improving. A lot of these fighters, you think they just retire and don't get better or don't do anything, or they just get worse. But a lot of times they still be training nonstop. And I've seen Chuck Liddell on Instagram, different things, training with Glover Teixeira. So he's been training this whole time. He just hasn't been in the ring. So he could come back better, or at least more technically better than he was when he left. He's still going to be older than he when he left. He's not going to be as good as like what's called health wise and age wise. He's way past his prime, but as far as technical wise, he could have got technically better since he left. So we don't know a lot of what Chuck Liddell will be bringing back, and he probably won't come back to the same way he left. It's probably going to have some little new wrinkles to his game when he comes back in there. So we don't really know too much. That's the interesting factor. But as far as Bellator, definitely Chuck Liddell could have some interesting matchups. He definitely could come out. I don't know how long he would have, how much he have left in the tank, but it's all what's called hypothetical right now. But it's coming to reality. I think when he comes out of retirement, they already setting the first fight up for him is Tito, what it appears to be, unless Tito pulls out or Chuck Liddell pulls out or whatever the case happens. That seems like the fight that's first going to happen, the Chuck versus Tito fight. And Chuck Liddell will probably still be favored over Tito, even though Tito's been active slightly active, and Chuck Liddell has been completely inactive. Chuck Liddell will always seem to be favored in the matchup between Tito and Chuck Liddell. This is how it is. But that's about all I got to say. I think it's certainly a lot of interesting. This could be an interesting, lot of interesting matches for Chuck Liddell and a lot of hypothetical matchups. And I think he'll fare pretty well if he can at least get one win of his belt under his belt. And Tito will probably likely be, if that fight happens, will likely be the fight that gets him back into the game. So that's about all I got to say for this news. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and come back for more videos. Peace. Welcome back.